The end of chapter 41 revealed a worldwide famine, and this was impacting Jacob and Joseph's brothers. News reached Joseph's family back in Canaan that you can buy grain in Egypt. But what they do not know is Joseph is second in command. 10 of Jacob's sons head to Egypt. He had 12, but Joseph was already in Egypt, and Benjamin was left behind. The reason for not sending Benjamin was Jacob did not want to lose another child, especially one that belonged to Rachel. Think about what has been done over the last 20 years, including God using Joseph's ability to interpret dreams to place him as second in command over the entire nation. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they bowed down to him. But this does mean they knew it was Joseph. In fact, they didn't recognize him, but they were in a position of need. And typically, when you're in need, you become humble. They did. Joseph recognized his brothers, but he did not acknowledge them, asking where they came from. At this point, Joseph is nearly 40 and wearing official Egyptian clothing. Seeing his brothers made Joseph think of him, remember his youth. At first, Joseph accuses his brothers of being foreign spies, which was a crime punishable by death. If the brothers were spies, the meaning of nakedness of the land would imply they were sent to determine the vulnerabilities of the land. The brothers do deny being spies, but admit to being there to buy food. They refer to themselves as servants, which can be seen as one sign Joseph's dreams were coming true as they bowed down before Joseph. Jacob had used the same tactic with Esau, referring to himself as Esau's servant despite having the birthright and his position. The brothers do not recognize Joseph by appearance, but his name has been changed to Zaphanath-Paneah, and it seems like Joseph wants revenge. Would be hard to blame Joseph for all that has been done to him. But his brothers insist they are not spies, but honest people wanting to buy food. Joseph reiterates they have come to determine the vulnerabilities of Egypt. But the response was surprising. It was said they were of 12 brothers of one man from Canaan, but one is no more. Joseph has to be pleased knowing Benjamin and Jacob were alive. And his brothers even remembered him, but why does Joseph keep insisting they were up to no good? Joseph makes a demand of his brothers to bring their youngest brother to him, or they will not return home. Now it's apparent that Joseph is testing his brothers. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved. There's no way Joseph could have planned this beforehand. But calling that Benjamin was alive makes him want to see his brother again. Joseph puts his brothers into custody for 3 days. But his actions are not as some dictator out for blood, but a loving brother who wants to see his brother. Benjamin was Joseph's only full brother, as both parents were the same. His other 10 brothers were from Jacob, but through different moms. He tells the brothers to do as instructed, and they will live. Joseph knows the situation from the famine has been a dire one, so he tells his brothers to leave. 1 behind, and the other 9 leave with their grain, which reversed his original plan. He instructs clearly to bring your brother in order to verify their honesty. But this is still a strange request. The brothers come to the conclusion they are punished for their wrongdoing to their other brother, Joseph, who they claim is no more. Reuben points out he was against the whole plan, and alludes to his other brothers being responsible, and blood was the price to pay. Remember, the brothers did not know Joseph was Joseph, so they assumed he was unable to understand their language, but Joseph overheard them, and knew what they were saying. They were able to communicate prior because they used an interpreter. He went away, wept due to what he had heard, and took Simeon into custody. And the other brothers left. They leave with instructions for their journey. Another fact the brothers do not yet know. Joseph returned their money. They will soon find the money, but when the money is found, they begin to panic. They do not know Joseph returned the money but somehow forgot to pay him, and thought it was part of their punishment for what had happened nearly 30 years ago. They arrive home in Canaan and tell Jacob what happened, including the governor calling them spies and instructing them back home to retrieve their brother Benjamin. They take their grain without knowing they still had their money. Jacob, hearing of the story, lashed out at the brothers, holding them responsible for the loss of Joseph and now Simeon. We are uncertain of exactly why Jacob lashed out at his sons. Reuben makes a bold command telling Jacob they will deliver Benjamin back to him. But if they do not, Jacob can kill his own 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, but Jacob refuses to send Benjamin. And it seems Jacob is saying it's better to count Simeon lost than to risk losing Benjamin. This declaration must have been extremely difficult for his other sons to hear, of favoritism, as it is never easy to hear and accept. Jacob has convinced himself losing Benjamin would cause his death. Charles Spurgeon wrote, in regards to the need for corn in comparison to grace, a pitiful plight. These sons of Jacob were overtaken by a famine. We may talk of famines, friends, but none of us know what they are. We have heard of a famine in Ireland, and some dreadful stories have been related to us that have harrowed our hearts and almost made our hair stand up on end, but even there the full fury of famine was not known. We have heard, too, to our great grief, that there are still in this city dark and hideous spots where men and women are absolutely perishing from hunger, who have sold from off their backs the last rags that covered them, and are now unable to leave the house, and positively perishing of famine. Such cases we have seen in our daily journals, and our hearts have been sick to think that such things should now occur. But we cannot any of us guess what is the terror of an universal famine, when all men are poor, because all men lack bread, when gold and silver are as valueless as the stones of the street, because mountains of silver and gold would scarce suffice to buy a single sheaf of wheat. Read the history of the famine of Samaria, and see the dreadful shifts to which women were driven, when they did even eat their own offspring. Famines are hells on earth. The famine which had overtaken Jacob was one which, if it had not at the moment of which this passage speaks exactly arrived at that dreadful pitch, was sure to come to it, for the famine was to last for 7 years. And if, through the spendthrift character of Eastern nations, they had not saved in the 7 years of plenty enough even for 1 year, what would become of them during the 6th or 7th year of famine? This was the state of Jacob's family. They were cast into a waste, howling wilderness of famine with but one oasis. And that oasis they did not hear of till just at the time to which our text refers, when they learned to their joy that there was corn in Egypt. Permit me now to illustrate the condition of the sinner by the position of these sons of Jacob. First, the sons of Jacob had a very great need of bread. There was a family of 66 of them. We are apt, when we read these names of the sons of Jacob, to think they were all lads. Are you aware that Benjamin, the youngest of them, was the father of 10 children at the time he went into Egypt, so that he was not so very small a lad at any rate? And all the rest had large families, so that there were 66 to be provided for. Well, a famine is frightful enough when there is one man who is starving, when there is one brought down to a skeleton through leanness and hunger, but when 66 mouths are craving for bread. That is indeed a horrible plight to be in. But what is this compared with the sinner's needs? His necessities are such that only infinity can supply them. He has a demand before which the demands of 66 mouths are as nothing. He has before him the dreadful anticipation of a hell, from which there is no escape. He has upon him the heavy hand of God, who has condemned him on account of his sins.